So hello and welcome to yet another video of the channel. Today, as you can see, we have a very special guest here. And I'm so nervous that I'm even mixing up the words.
Your introduction was great. I don't know what you're talking about.
Which is Ivy the Occultist. Many of you probably already know her, but for those who don't, please, Ivy, introduce yourself.
Oh, sure. Okay. Hi, Aster. Thank you so much for having me on your channel. We just finished recording another collab on my channel, so this is our second recording for the day. But I am Ivy Corvus. My channel name is Ivy the Occultist. I think YouTube is my primary platform where I just kind of post whatever I want as far as the occult community is concerned. I am mainly a chaos magician first and foremost. That's what I always say. But I'm also a witch, a shamanic practitioner. I have a history with ceremonial magic and Zen Buddhism. So kind of all of those things really influence my occult practice. And then I just make videos on whatever is inspiring me at the moment. So yeah, I do have an Instagram. I kind of just post more personal things on it though. I'm not like a professional Instagrammer person. So yeah, that's me.
Yeah, all of Ivy's links will be in the description down below, so make sure to give her a visit because her content is super informative. I think you make some of the most detailed and in-depth content that we can find out there. And today, I couldn't have a better guest to talk about the topics at hand because Ivy has recently won 5 awards at the Witches Award of 2023. We had to mention this because 5 awards, that is a very big number. Congratulations, girl. I know how hard you have worked for this.
Thank you. I didn't know you were going to bring that up, but thank you. Now I feel all awkward. First of all, I feel so undeserving because there's so many amazing content creators in our community. I know, I'm working on that. It's so hard for me. Thank you. I'll just say that.
We had to mention this because being on the internet is a roller coaster. It's a lot of work. So you deserve the recognition. And also considering that we will be talking about psychology, mental health, the shadow self, I also thought it would be nice to mention that Ivy has just finished an AAS in psychology. So that
well, I guess I should clarify. So I have my 2-year degree in psychology. I am going for the 4-year. I'm double majoring though. So so psychology is one major and I'm in year 3 for that. I'm in year 2, almost done in year 2 for molecular biosciences. So it's just taking me an incredibly long amount of time because when you're double majoring in 2 things that directly oppose, like psychology classes and molecular bio classes do not overlap. So there is just,
I can imagine that.
So much. Yeah. So I'm not a trained professional as far as like, I'm not a psychologist. I don't have my bachelor's degree yet. So I just want to put all that out there. I do have a lot of personal like interest in psychology though. It's something I've studied for a really long time. So that's kind of where my perspective is coming from with all of this. Just want to make sure that everybody knows that, you know.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that to make sure for everybody watching that it's not just some random person giving her opinion. It is somebody with formal education on the things we are going to talk about. I thought it would be important to make that clear for the audience.
Sure.
So let's jump right in. We are going to start talking a little bit about shadow work, the shadow self, and mental health. And my first question would be, witchcraft practice and mental health, can the first benefit the second, and how? What would you say about that?
Are you ready for me to go on a whole rant? Because I have a lot to say. Okay, great. I think that witchcraft in general can affect someone's mental health, not necessarily for good or bad. It can just affect it in any way, depending on the individual. Of course, there can be benefits to it. I think that witchcraft gives an individual a sense of autonomy and individuality. There's a lot of things in many cultures that make us feel like we are absolutely powerless, that we can't really change the things around us. And so witchcraft gives us this ability to actually make those changes and go after the things that we want want. So it gives us this sense of empowerment is what I would say. But then more than that, I've also talked about on my channel many times how I struggled with severe clinical depression for 30 years of my life. It was a really difficult time for me. There were many days where I did not want to be alive, and I don't want to go into the deep dark aspects of that, but it was really a horrible experience. And then I finally got to the point in my life where I was like, why am I not doing magic for this? Why am I not doing witchcraft to help my mental health? I was already practicing witchcraft. I was already a witch doing all these witchy things. Why was I not taking advantage of that and using that for my mental health? So I started regularly performing rituals that I had put together for myself. And I don't really like to disclose what exactly it was that I'm doing or that I did, because for a couple reasons. What I did may or may not work for someone else. And then two, I just don't want the liability of someone trying to do what I did and then not having the exact same results, you know? But I will say I worked a lot with crystals. I did a lot of gritting. I did these really formal ceremonies every new moon and every full moon. I made servitors that were great for my mental health. So there was a lot of different components that I was bringing in. And I ultimately cured my depression with my witchcraft practice, which to me is an absolute miracle, especially considering I already had training with psychology, right? I had already taken many college level courses in psychology. I was already aware of shadow work. I had already done that. I was in therapy for years. I tried every drug, every treatment, gratitude journals, you know, all of these different modalities that ultimately just did not work for me. And I was still depressed. And it took witchcraft, actually doing witchcraft, to heal myself. And now it's been at least a couple years since then. And I can firmly say that if my depression were coming back, it would have came back by now, and it hasn't. So I am literally living proof that witchcraft can better your mental health. And I think that's just it's so incredible and so empowering, like I said in the beginning. So that is my little rant on that.
Yes, I totally agree with you. I don't know if I've ever had depression, but practicing witchcraft does give us this sense of personal power that we often need in life, but we cannot find anywhere per se. So I totally agree. And okay, there's an aspect of ourselves that can influence everything else in our lives, and not only when it comes to spirituality. So that is the shadow self. How would you define the shadow self?
Okay, so there's a lot of misrepresentation of the shadow self. I think that people don't really fully understand what it is. And just to clarify again, I am not a Jungian psychologist, of course, but I do have a lot of interest in training in this area. And the shadow self is all about these repressed part of yourselves. And it's usually, shadow work specifically refers to a form of therapy that was developed by Carl Jung. And I think people take the term shadow work and they just try to apply it to any sort of therapy that makes you feel better and deals with your trauma. And that's not necessarily the case. Shadow work is a very specific form of therapy from Carl Jung that typically takes the shadow self, which is all of these repressed parts of yourself that have been rejected, usually from the childhood, from your primary caregivers. So if you had, let's take an example here. Let's say you were a very loud child growing up and you were just loud and chaotic, and that's normally how you are. And then you had your parents always telling you to be quiet and to stop talking. And you learned this way of being, of not talking and kind of repressing that part of yourself and becoming more quiet and withdrawn. And then as an adult, you learned that you're not even able to communicate your feelings anymore. You're not able to speak your truth because your parents told you to be quiet all of those years. So this repressed part of yourself, the loud, chaotic, carefree, it may result in that you actually look at other people who are loud and chaotic, and you might even be annoyed with them. You might find it really frustrating that other people are loud because you weren't allowed the same amount of space. You feel like that they're taking up too much space, but it's not about them taking up too much space. It's about you not being allowed to take up space when you were a child. So that's an example of like a repressed, rejected part of yourself. And the goal isn't to really get rid of the shadow self. It's not to totally diminish, get rid of that side of yourself. It's more about integration. So you are integrating those shadow aspects of yourself with your conscious ego. And that way you can live a lot more holistically. That's another misconception too that I hear a lot about is trying to get rid of all the shadows, but you're not trying to get rid of the shadows. You're trying to integrate it together. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, definitely. Because, like we were talking about in the first call, when it comes to people stepping into other cultures and trying to explain them, there's a lot of people who don't really know what they're talking about when it comes to shadow self and shadow work, who are trying to teach others. And then we get a lot of misinformation out there. So that was a great answer.
Oh,
And
thank you.
how can the shadow self impact a spiritual or witchcraft practice of a person?
Yeah, so you can have these unconscious behaviors that are kind of doing the opposite of what you want. Let's say you're doing a spell and you're trying to manifest something, and then you have all of these self-sabotaging behaviors that are happening in your mundane world that directly counteract or counterbalance what it is that you're trying to do with your spell work. There's a possibility that you have some shadows, some repressed parts of yourself that are playing into those self-sabotaging behaviors and kind of making your spell work not effective. So I do think it's important for people to work on themselves and do a little bit of shadow work if necessary. I don't think that it's necessary for every single individual, but it does help you align yourself with your true will a little bit deeper so you can become a lot more effective in your spell work. You're not self-sabotaging. And yeah, I mean, it's just good for your overall health and well-being anyways. But yeah, you just really don't want those self-sabotaging behaviors, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yes, totally.
Yeah.
And yeah, coming from that question to the next one, I really wanted to know your perspective on whether or not everybody should do shadow work, because we can see easily on the internet people saying that you must, especially if you are practicing anything spiritual. People have a tendency to saying you have to. So what do you think about that?
I have a very strong opinion about this. As with most things, I have very strong opinions. But I'm always open to change, by the way. I'm always open to enlightenment. You know, I'm okay if I'm wrong. But I do have a strong opinion that no, not every single person needs to do shadow work, but every single person should potentially do shadow work, if that makes sense. I feel like that question is very similar to asking, does every witch need to meditate? Well, no, not every witch needs to meditate. You know, people can still have effective magical practices without meditating. Would meditating maybe make them a little bit better and more efficient in their practice or help them tap into their psychic, intuitive self? Sure, absolutely. And same with shadow work. I think it can align you to your will, your ego, and become a more holistic, integrated person. But I also don't think it's necessary for every single individual. And I find it really frustrating when people try to apply rules to a practice that is virtually no rules. Like a lot of people go into witchcraft to kind of get away from dogmatic institutions and to really create some sort of magical practice that works for them. And so I find it frustrating when people try to apply these rules or absolute truths of what someone should or shouldn't do, because everyone is very, very different. Some people don't even have a lot of trauma that they need to even do shadow work for, you know? And also, as I mentioned in the beginning, shadow work is a very specific form of therapy. So I think that everybody should be in therapy regardless. Okay. We all need to be, we all need to be working on ourselves. Okay. But do people need to specifically do shadow work, or is there another form of therapy that maybe works better for them? So I think it is really up to the individual whether they decide to do shadow work or not. So I hope that makes sense.
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
And speaking of the shadow work, how would you define it for somebody who never heard of it, doesn't know what that is?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So shadow work is essentially working with your shadow self, those unconscious, repressed parts of yourself, and then bringing them in integration or integrating them or bringing them in union with your conscious self, your ego, to be ultimately more holistic and integrated at the end. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So what would be your advice for somebody who has never done shadow work and they are thinking about it, but they're not really sure how to do it?
Yeah. So, okay, I have so many pieces of advice, and I'm trying to decide which one I want to give first. The first one, if you're truly interested in shadow work, I would highly recommend seeing a Jungian psychologist specifically, because that is going to be the best avenue, especially if you don't know what you're doing or don't know what to look for, etc. It's like, trying to take yourself through therapy. Sometimes you just need a professional to guide you
Yeah.
through that. So, yeah, definitely seeing a psychologist, specifically one that does have that Jungian training that can do shadow work specifically. I do have a ton of book recommendations as well. So is that okay if I just go through?
Yes, please
Okay.
do.
Oh man, I have so many. All right. So I think that, let's see, where shall we start? You guys, I have like 15 books here. So I think one of the books that I want to start with, this one's called Meeting the Shadow, and it has a ton of authors because it's actually a collection of a bunch of essays about shadow work. So this is Meeting the Shadow, the Hidden Power of the Dark Side of Human Nature. And it even goes into societies, like the shadow work of societies and cultures, not necessarily just shadow work of individuals. So love this book. Definitely check this out. Definitely start reading some Carl Jung. I think that's really important, although he can be really difficult. His material is difficult to digest. It is like reading a very heavy, thick textbook. So I do have Carl Jung recommendations, but before we even get into Carl Jung, I want to also throw out this book. It's called Romancing the Shadow. I think this is a good read for somebody who is a beginner, but I didn't like it as much as Meeting the Shadow. So this is like my number one recommendation. This one's by Connie Zweig and and Steve Wolf. They both have PhDs. So this is a good book to check out. And then we're going to talk about psychology later on. So I'm going to leave all of these books for later.
Okay.
Listen, you said advice for beginners. Here we go. No, if you do want to get into Carl Jung and just understanding his philosophies a little bit more, diving into his key ideas, I think is really helpful. It's not specific to shadow work, but understanding his philosophies is a start. So picking up a tiny book like this, it's called Jung, the Key Ideas, and it talks about his analytical psychology from dreams to the collective unconscious. This one's by Ruth Snowden. So you can see it's like very small. It's just very bite-sized, very easy to get into. I also think, I lied, we're going to do this book next. The Body Keeps the Score. This is fantastic. Have you read it? It's so good.
On my list. I've heard only good things about this book. I really want to read it.
You have to, anybody, not even, this isn't really specifically shadow work, but it is therapy and addressing your traumas. And that's really kind of where you want to start, right? Because you need to start digging deeper into why you are the way you are. You need to start a journaling practice, and you need to start identifying your behaviors and patterns. So journaling is going to be a really big thing. Meditating is going to be a really big thing, and becoming a silent observer and just understanding your inner mechanisms, the inner mechanisms of your mind, and then also addressing your traumas. So The Body Keeps the Score is another one that I would recommend that I love. And then I feel like I'm talking about books way too much. So maybe I'll just
There's no such a thing as talking too much about books.
Okay, I'm gonna throw one more out there. Let's see. Okay, so this one is called The Drama of the Gifted Child, and this book made me bawl my eyes out in the best way possible. It's very, very small. It's by Alice Miller, which is a staple. You'll see a lot of psychologists recommending Alice Miller books because it's just so foundational in the psychology world. I just read it. Just read it. I will go on a whole rant. So if you really want to start shadow work and looking at your childhood trauma specifically, and those repressed parts of yourself that developed as a rejection from your parental figures, read The Drama of the Gifted Child, and then prepare yourself to be really kind of depressed for 3 days afterwards, but in a good way. So
yeah, it's like poking into the wound in order to heal it. It's part of the process.
Yes, I agree. And then, of course, the Carl Jung books, but I will stop there for now.
Okay. And let's say that a person has addressed childhood trauma with therapy and shadow work. And as the years go by, do you think that shadow work and the shadow self should continue being worked on? Or is there a part where there is a moment that you can say, no, I've done enough?
Okay, no, absolutely. It is a work in progress forever. There is no ultimate finish line. It's really just a continued process of betterment. And some of this stuff you forget too. Like I've gone through a lot of shadow work myself, and I've been able to identify where things come from. If I'm feeling a gut feeling about somebody and I'm like, ooh, I don't like them, or ooh, I'm jealous of them, you know, some sort of feeling there, I'm able to take that feeling and dissect that and say, okay, was it actually anything they did? Or is it more of a result of my own shadow self kind of rearing its ugly head in this moment because I'm jealous for something they had as a child that maybe I didn't have as a child? And knowing that process is part of the integration, right? Like you are integrating the shadow self with your conscious self so you can identify your triggers, your patterns of behavior and thoughts, etc. And yeah, just being able to walk through life and be a better person overall. So yeah, it's definitely a continued process forever. It's not like a one and done deal. You have to be continuing that and just kind of reminding yourself every now and then and being gentle with yourself and bringing yourself back to where you should be. So yeah.
Yeah, I also think, correct me if I'm wrong, but trauma can also happen after childhood. So something else could happen along the way that we need to work on. So yeah, I totally agree.
Yes.
But now let's get into the second part of this conversation, which is something that comes up a lot when we are talking about magic and spirituality, which is the placebo effect. Many people attribute witchcraft and magic results to a placebo effect. So we have to talk about it. Could you tell us what is the placebo effect, please?
Yeah. So, I mean, the basic definition of a placebo effect is it started in the medical field where patients would be given some sort of treatment that doesn't actually have any sort of biological, what's the word I'm looking for? Biological effect, I suppose. It should have had no effect on them. However, them receiving this treatment was a trigger for this placebo effect. And what they experienced afterwards was improvement in their symptoms. Maybe they didn't have the issue any longer. Nothing they received in the treatment actually supposedly helped their biological issue, but it triggered this ability for their body to heal themselves and for them to be able to overcome these symptoms. And the one thing with the placebo effect, I will say, is that you can't just, how do I want to say this? You can and you can't just will it to happen. You need some sort of trigger present for the placebo effect to be successful. You can't just be like, okay, well, I wake up today and I'm not depressed anymore. I'm going to placebo effect my way out of this. I am no longer depressed because I will it, so mote it be. It doesn't quite work like that. You have to have some sort of trigger in order to kind of trick yourself psychologically into healing yourself. And so those treatments in those cases, whether the doctors were giving the patients pills or even fake surgeries, those served as the triggers to get the placebo response going in someone's head or body.
Okay. And maybe that's why many people believe that the results that we get with witchcraft are a placebo effect. So what is your perspective on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, witchcraft could be the trigger, right? Like witchcraft could ultimately be the trigger that gets the inner mechanisms going so we can have that placebo effect and really heal ourselves. At the end of the day, I've gone back and forth about this so many times because I've practiced magic from a more psychological approach. And then I've kind of, with a lot of the spirit work I do, I've kind of shifted my perspective about that. And I think at the end of the day, it just doesn't matter. Part of me wants to say that, yes, it could be a placebo effect, or no, definitely not, because what I've experienced with spirits just doesn't match with that. But I'm never going to know the answer because I don't personally believe, this is very chaos magician of me, I don't personally believe that we have any way of knowing what the objective truth is, because everything that we experience as a human being is 100% subjective. It is so subjective. And because of that, because our experiences are subjective and there's no way for us to experience objectivity, I cannot say whether it is placebo effect or not. And does it matter? Does it even matter? If it is placebo effect or not, it's still working, right? Like it's still giving you the results. Yes. So that is how I feel about it, is that ultimately it doesn't matter because what's giving you results is what really matters.
Yeah, I totally agree as well. I think that people try to use the placebo placebo effect argument to belittle the results that we get.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter if it is or not, as long as it is working.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it is somebody else's shadow self manifesting at us, you know?
That's very true. Yeah. Yeah, it could be them. Well, I see that you're healing and I'm having jealousy over that healing because I don't have that. So, so yeah, I'm going to lash out.
And I have to agree also, like when it comes to spirit work, there are certain things that happen that, I mean, this can just be a placebo. It is very subjective, as you've said, but not everything fits in that box of a placebo effect. And only when you walk through that path, you are able to see those things happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, just the other night, I was talking about this on one of my other videos. I have a lot of spirits in my home that I work with now, and I experience a lot of spiritual phenomena where I literally saw a hand pushing through my curtain towards me, making like audible noises that it was not in my head. And you have those moments where you think to yourself, am I insane right now? Because I'm hearing something, this curtain is moving, and I see a hand moving. And by the way, it wasn't scary. It was just a spirit that I was working with. And I was just like, oh, hey, how's it going? You're here in my bedroom right now. Not a big deal. But there are situations like that, especially when you get to work with spirits, that there is no way that I could have just placebo affected this curtain moving and me hearing this audible sound, So there are some instances where I just don't think it's the placebo effect, but I do think the placebo effect does play a huge role in a lot of the practices that we do as witches. So yeah, it's maybe not the ultimate answer, but I think it is a piece to it.
Yeah. And there is no problem if it is placebo or not, as long as it works.
Right.
What's the
Who cares?
I don't
cares?
get why people are so annoyed.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, the next two questions have been already answered with the two first ones.
Oh, really? We already blew through those. Nice.
So, do you have more book recommendations? I think you do, right?
Yes, I do.
Please share
Okay.
them.
I would love to. Okay, so if we're talking about Carl Jung specifically, I know I already gave the Ruth Snowden book, The Key Ideas, which kind of gives you that entry point into reading Carl Jung without actually reading his books because they can be dense. But if you want the next step up, I have this other book. It's called The Essential Jung, and this is by Anthony Storr. So this has a lot of excerpts from a lot of Carl Jung's writings, and I think this is probably the next step up from this little tiny book here. And then once you actually get to the big meaty chunks of Carl Jung's work, of course, he has a ton of volumes like this. So I just grabbed this one. It's The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, which I do think is very necessary for witches to read if they're interested in Carl Jung. Just so much fabulous information in here. He also has another one, which I don't have the physical copy of, but it's Psychology and Alchemy is what it's called. So I would definitely recommend that volume as well. And he has a couple other ones about the occult, but I didn't personally like them, so I'm not going to mention those. Anyways, I didn't feel like it was helpful to me in any way. It was basically him just talking about his treatment with his patients and the experiments that he did. And I just didn't, the other books I recommended are better. Just trust me. Anyways. And then the last book that I wanted to recommend is actually not on shadow work at all, but it's called Eastern Body, Western Mind. It's about the chakra system. And a lot of people say chakra, it's actually chakra. And this book is so fantastic because there was so much cultural context that was lost when chakras migrated from the east to the west, which is really frustrating. And I feel like the author Anna Dea Judith does a really good job of touching on that while also incorporating Western ideas of psychology in with the chakra system to kind of make a new system for evaluating your shadow self. So it's kind of like shadow work adjacent, I would say, because it really does have you assessing your childhood traumas, and there's tons of tips and exercises for how to actually work through that, tons of journaling prompts. So if you're somebody that maybe can't afford to see a Jungian psychologist, you can't get in to see a psychologist, I would recommend picking up this book. There's a whole self-assessment in it as well, where you can see which points of your body are deficient or maybe overactive. And then it gives you exercises accordingly to kind of fix that, whether it's overactive or underactive. So love this book. It's one of my favorites. It's another one of those books that totally changed my life. And I know how chakras are so controversial because of the whole migration from the East and all of that. So I'm usually really careful about any book that says that it's about chakras. I'm a little bit like, I don't know if it's going to be good or not, but I really, really enjoyed this. And I thought it was so good. So yeah, that's kind of my whole, how many books did I, 4, 5, 6, 7 book recommendations, but
Yeah, I'm sure that people will leave this video with a lot to think about and some
yeah.
very good recommendations to get started. Even I got interested in this last one. I'm gonna look it up. It sounds very useful. But now, there's a little something that I do in every interview, which I called a 101 challenge. I am going to mention a word or something that belongs to the spiritual realm, witchcraft, etc. And you are going to define it or reply to it with the first thing that comes to your mind.
Okay. So you're going to give me a term and then I just reply with the first thing that pops into my head.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, for example,
I'm scared.
Let me see if I can give you an example. A beverage.
Okay, tea. Yeah.
Something like this,
Okay, sure. Okay, I love this. I'm a little nervous. All right.
So the first one is witchcraft.
I don't want to say the first word that came into my head. Wow, that is horrible. I don't know if I should say the first word that came to my head. The first word that I thought of was oversaturated. But that's like not. That's not good.
Isn't that kind of true if we think about it?
Yeah. No, I mean, I could have came up with something nice like empowerment or like, mystical, but no, oversaturated. That's what we're going. Listen, I feel like some of the magic has been lost just a little bit. That's just my personal opinion. No, that's not true. I don't think the magic has been lost. I think it's just harder to find in the midst of all these books and sources and voices. And I'm so grateful for that, because when I started my witchcraft practice in the late 90s and early 2000s, it was so difficult to find any occult books at all. I grew up in a very small town and it was hard, and no internet. Okay. We weren't really we weren't able to find stuff on the internet that easily. So it was definitely frustrating. And I love that we have all these sources for beginners now, but because of that, there is an oversaturation in the market and a lot of the information gets lost in translation, I feel, or watered down. And then you really have to weed through all of this stuff to find the golden nuggets. So I'm just trying to justify my own wording right now. Sorry, go ahead.
Next one, chaos magic.
Ooh, fun. That's literally the first word. It's fun. It's exciting. You get to do whatever you want. You get to be super innovative and creative.
Crystal.
Labradorite. Why? That's my least favorite crystal. I don't like labradorite at all. This is really interesting. You have me questioning my own brain.
A book. A book.
Well, no, the first thing that comes to my head is Carl Jung, of course, because we were literally just talking about him.
Just talking about it.
Dang it. Okay, book. A Libradol and Cyclenat. That's the only other, oh my gosh, that's terrible. I think if maybe I hadn't recommended so many books, then maybe I would be thinking of others.
Spirit.
Ancestor. Yeah. I think that's such an important part in a lot of people's practices and my own as well. So yeah.
An herb.
Rosemary for sure. And when we did that collaboration where you were talking about rosemary so much, I love rosemary. Like, I use it so heavily in my practice. So that is something we have in common for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Deities.
Wow, I didn't really have anything come up for that. The first word that came up when you said deity for me was pantheist, because that is personally how I'm not necessarily a polytheist, like a hard or a soft polytheist. I'm more of a pantheist, where I see energy in everything, rocks, trees. It's similar to animism, but there's God or divinity interspersed within everything, rather than being like an objective one icon for a deity. Anyways. I feel like I'm talking too long about my answers.
No, no, no. And finally, a regret. Something
Ooh.
that you regret within your practice, let's say.
Okay, this is probably going to sound so ignorant, but I don't have any regrets. I'm not kidding. Like, not a single regret. And if you asked me that, like, about my life in general, I have no regrets for anything in my life. Like, I feel so strongly that everything that happened, like, I am in the right place at the right time, you know? So seriously, no regrets. I don't hang on to that shit. I just let it go.
That is the right answer, girl.
Okay, good. Good, because I was like, oh, does that make me ignorant to say that? But
No, not at all. Not at all. Ivy, my God, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for being here. This video was super enriching for me as well. I'm gonna come back to it and take a look at the books you've mentioned. I will look them up.
yes, there was a lot for sure.
And yeah, is there anything else that you would like to say to the people watching this?
Oh, I just want to say thank you, Aster. I loved our collaboration today. It was so fun to just get to know you and your practice and then talk about some mental health stuff. I really hope that Jungian psychologists don't roast me for how I said things because listen, you guys, I've had a really long day and coming immediately into recording, I was like trying to switch my brain around to, all right, so talking about psychology now. But anyways, thank you for having me on the channel. I thought it was really fun.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I can't thank you enough. And yeah, if you guys who don't know Ivy, I think that's kind of hard. I think that's kind of difficult. She's pretty known. She's an influential girl. But if you don't know her, make sure to take a look at the links in the description to get to know her content, especially on YouTube. It is really priceless. So, as I always say at the end of the video, remember that practice makes perfect. So let's get witching. Bye-bye.